Hello viewers, fans and friends of Studio Brulé. This is Steve Brulé and it is Coffee Break, where we have a look at a few of the things that have come across my desk in the past 24 hours. And without further ado, let's get straight into it. Today we've got I'll start with a few small items as usual, and I want to say hello to Josue Veguija. How are you doing, man? We've got to start with a few small items, quick items, and then we've got a bunch of items on the obsession with all female events today, and then update on some climate change stuff. If you can hear me all right there, or if there's any problem with the audio, let me know. You might hear some noise today because unfortunately they're doing a little bit of construction just outside my apartment here, and maybe they're done now, I don't know for sure. So let me get this up on the shared screen here. Freight trains. This is CBC News, and this is the ongoing saga of the hashtag Shutdown Canada and their success using the First Nation people's issues to further their disruption of the economy in Canada and their pursuit of the climate extremists and the alarmist goals of completely shutting down the oil industry. And just have a sip of coffee here. CBC News reported yesterday that there is another freight train derailment, and this is near Prince George, which is in British Columbia, and there's a school evacuation as a result of this. And let's read a little bit quote from the CBC article. Since late December, there have been more than half a dozen derailments across Canada, with at least 3 in British Columbia. Now, I don't recall them mentioning if that is higher than normal, but it seems higher than normal. I don't recall seeing train derailments so often in the news in Canada. They do happen. I just don't recall them as being this frequent. Let me adjust this camera here a little bit. But now we have 3 in BC alone in the last couple of months. Let's look a little further into this article. No, I didn't get the pictures. So there was a photo with the article, and do have a look at it. This stuff is easy to find. And that's just a little update on what looks to me suspiciously like the climate terrorists derailing trains. But of course, there's an investigation going on in this, whether they will publicize, whether the results will reach the news, since the news is, unfortunately, in Canada, is often sympathetic to these organizations. How much they actually reveal to us is hard to say, but time will tell. Here, the Babylon Bee. I just popped this up there because Babylon Bee is sometimes too close to the truth. My health care is none of your business, says woman who demands that you pay for her health care. And as we saw yesterday, feminists have successfully convinced the UK to, or I think it was Scotland, to provide tampons for free to all women. I just like to show some of at least the comic side. If you've not been following the Babylon Bee, do follow them. They're quite hilarious at times. And here is some more information on this incident and this ongoing problem in Canada. Warren Buffett's company has bailed on the Saguenay LNG project because of Canadian political context, promoter says. And Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company, has opted not to invest their previously planned $4 billion into liquefied natural gas plant and pipeline. Well, that's the bad news. Let's read a little bit out of the article here. She said, with instability in the last few weeks, such as ongoing rail blockades, foreign investors are getting nervous. And they rightly should be getting nervous. Let's take another quote out of that article, reading this. Financing is a bit like a house of cards. If you take one away, the house collapses, he said. The house of cards is in the process of falling. Yep, that's a big problem. And a lot of analysts are predicting that we're going to see more investment dollars fleeing the country, and of course, fewer investors seeing Canada as a viable place, a safe place to invest their money. It's as predictable as the sun coming up tomorrow morning. Here, another little tidbit from the Babylon Bee. Again, do follow them, they're funny. Harvard now offering 4-year degree in feeling oppressed. I think they've had that 4-year degree for decades now, and it's called Women's Studies in the beginning, and it's called Gender Studies now, and it's basically a 4-year degree in feeling oppressed. But the Babylon Bee actually writes an interesting and funny little satire to go along with their headlines, so those are quite fun to read as well. And here from Gary Hewitt. Quebec to approve $1.1 billion cement plant without an environmental review. That is very interesting, because environmental reviews are required for just about everything in Canada. And they are used to block investments and building and construction and projects right across the country, except in Quebec. Let's read what they have to say here. A couple of quotes from this article. The plant would release 1.7 million tons of greenhouse gases per year, according to an evaluation by a Canadian engineering consultant firm. The greenhouse gas output would make it the #1 industrial polluter in Quebec. Quebec is a very special case in Canada. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Canada, and especially not familiar with Quebec, the global heads of the global mafia organization were headed out of Montreal from the 1970s, early 1970s, right through until almost 2010. I think it was just before 2010 when some of the top bosses were put in jail and the kingpin fellow was assassinated, throwing a disarray into the Montreal mob. Now, the Montreal mob took over from the New York mob when this one fellow, and I forget the mob boss's name, he went down to New York City, and of course with a lot of support from his fellow mafia members, he killed all 3 of the top mafia bosses in the world who were working out of New York City at that time, and established his family in control of the worldwide mafia organization for the following 40 years. And there's a documentary on this produced by W5 about 6-8 years ago, of course, after the Montreal mob had lost control of the global mafia organization. Throughout those 40 years, every single construction company and project in Quebec, even if it was pouring a concrete sidewalk of 10 by 10 up to I think it was a $5 billion project run out of Toronto, downtown Montreal, every project had to pay 5% fee to the mob. And there were no exceptions on that, and of course they ruled ruthlessly. Refusal to pay results in death. So, the mob, although is in disarray, does not run. The Montreal mob does no longer run the Quebec organization, or it doesn't run the mob world anymore. Still very powerful in Quebec. At their height, they had paid people on the payroll in every level of government in Quebec, right up to the Premier's office, right into the customs officials who let customs drugs in through the Montreal ports. The Montreal mob were known to send out pre-approved custom documents to their drug runners, who waltzed right through the Montreal customs. And to say that the mob is destroyed is a great over-exaggeration. They are not destroyed. They just don't run. They're not as powerful as they once were in Quebec. So this puts in mind of this because of this particular project getting approval. And keep in mind, their influence didn't stop at the Quebec border. Their influence was right around the world, including Ottawa, and most people would suspect, and I believe the documentary touches on this, including the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister of Canada. That mob boss was one of the most feared people in the entire world during his reign. So who is involved in the fact that this project in Quebec gets approved without environmental studies? Well, for those of you who are not Canadians, if you have this view of Canada as this peaceful, peace-loving group of people who have a perfect country and a perfect peace and all that, that is a fantasy. It's a pure fantasy. A lot of what goes on is far below the scenes, far below the surface. But Canada has as deep an underbelly as any other country in the world, any other first world country. Let's carry on here. The Guardian put out this feminist lie, again, written by her name, Sonia Soda. The idea that family courts are biased against men is a dangerous fallacy. Well, only a feminist could believe that, and you know how feminists twist facts and create their own false studies and surveys to prove, quote, what they already concluded before they write the survey. So let's take a look at this. Evidence shows that the disproportionately male judiciary is more likely to rule against abused women and children. Now, can anybody with a straight face say they believe that? With all of the studies to the contrary, with women winning 90% of contested custody cases, with men having their kids taken from their hands on a false allegation from a woman, even the lawyers say that the silver bullet, as Aaron Pittsey put it, is to accuse a man of abuse or assault and walk away with everything in family court. And she's got the audacity to sit here and say that this is a dangerous fallacy, that family courts are biased against men. Let's take a look here. Fathers for Justice demand the law enshrines a presumption of 50-50 contact. The claims of court bias against men have gained broad traction in the debate around the subject. Why? Because 90% of the people have friends or family who have experienced this same damn bias. You're not going to fool us with your lying, manipulative, feminist, quote, studies. Let's have another look here at another quote. Let's read this. Despite evidence to the contrary, a review of published court decisions found that they promote as much contact as possible with fathers, even in cases of proven domestic violence. You need to read the details on this to see what she's referring to. I did look into it, and it's very tricky wording. It is not what she is pretending it to be. But that's all the quotes I took out of that article for now. And Jim Bottle says here, they started me wondering if everything out of the MSM is BS. You're pretty much safe to assume that it's BS until you get proof otherwise when it's coming from the mainstream media. We have to realize, and we have to remember, I should say, that feminists dominate the mainstream media. They're all brainwashed with this crap. And they are the ones who are the gatekeepers of the mainstream, what gets onto the mainstream media, and how anything that they discuss is interpreted. Now this is an interesting article. I'm starting to, I've seen a few good articles out of Spiked Online lately. My memory was that Spiked Online was a left-wing, feminist-dominated organization as well, but some of their articles seem to be taking a bolder, more courageous stance. And here, this article is How Woke Illiberalism is Killing the Academy. Now, this is quite a long article, and it's worth reading. The University of Chicago is their case study here, and they use the University of Chicago because the University of Chicago has one of the strongest stances in favor of freedom of speech of any university in the U.S., which probably means any university in the world. They even coded it in their structure of the what they stand for in the university. So let's read a couple of quotes from this article. Chicago has been, from its inception, the most stalwart bastion of free expression in American higher education. And they do refer to some of their university documents and the history of the University of Chicago in actually following through on this. So if you're interested, read that Spiked Online article in its entirety. It's quite long, but it's quite well written. So while its administration and most of its faculty and students remain devoted to what is characterized in the Chicago Principles, that's their written out principles about surrounding freedom of expression, as the spirit and promise of the University of Chicago, a woke illiberalism is subverting that spirit and promise from within. And a couple of quotes here is going to demonstrate exactly where from within that is occurring. Let's read this quote. Although the 87 professors who demanded that the invitation to Bannon, that's Steve Bannon, who was part of the Trump administration for a short time, be revoked, asserted that they represented the breadth of the university's intellectual community. In fact, 36 of them, nearly one-third, and in fact that's over one-third, that's nearly 40%. So let's say 40% of them teach at either the School of Social Work, 20, or in the English department, 16. So there we have it. We're not surprised about the School of Social Work. These are intellectual midgets who are just out there to try and ramrod their bigotry out at the world. The English department, though, you would think, as an outsider, I would have assumed that intellectuals involved in the use of the English language, very invested in debate and open ideas, in literature, you would think that they would be the defenders of freedom of expression. But it is the opposite, as Janice Fiamengo would expresses this quite often and quite strongly. It is the opposite. These are the people who are least in defense of freedom of speech. They're most infected with left-wing feminist ideology. Let's read a bit of the letter the people wrote in their trying to get Bannon prohibited from talking on the campus. It is our responsibility as scholars not only to condemn and repudiate hatred expressed in each speech and other forms of actions, but to model forms of discussion. It says here, let's just reread this a little bit. It is our responsibility as scholars not only to condemn and repudiate hatred expressed in speech and other forms of action. No, it is not. It is not your responsibility. It is your responsibility as scholars to flesh out the truth in the free exchange of ideas. A university should be a place where bad ideas go to die, and if they're bad ideas, your responsibility as scholars is to kill bad ideas, not oppress them. Now, this article is going to make some very good points in here, and let's read this next quote. Before I do, let's just point out a comment by Iron Adam John. English literature used to be such a great field of study, such a shame, so much evil has taken it over. Yes, indeed it is. And as we've come to know, feminism destroys absolutely everything it touches. Let's read from the top here. Who is to decide what constitutes bullying or racially charged attacks? Who determines if and how speech, quote, demeans, intimidates, and harms others? Who deems what speech has no place in academic life? Would any individual who feels demeaned or harmed by speech have the power to exclude that speech from academic life? Is the English department proposing itself as the star chamber? These are the crux of the matter, these questions. And yes, the English department is proposing itself as the star chamber. He who determines what is hate speech determines what can be talked about, what can be thought about, and becomes the dictator of all. And if you haven't seen it, look up Christopher Hitchens' debate on one of the university campuses about hate speech, defending freedom of speech at all costs, including hate speech. Let's read on here. The Chicago principles, quote, guarantee all members of the university community the broadest possible latitude of expression. But the English department seeks the opposite goal. Not free speech, but licensed speech. Exactly. These people are the enemy of free speech, coming from the English department. Let's read another quote. And I assure you, these are just small quotes out of this article. It's quite long, but these quotes that I've captured here are quite worth emphasizing. The Chicago principles emphatically recognize this very point. Quote, it is not the proper role of the university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive. Concerns about civility and mutual respect can never be used as a justification for closing off discussion of ideas, however offensive or disagreeable those ideas may be to some members of our community. Amen. And these Chicago principles were drafted up, I think, well over 100 years ago. And they still hold today. And the problem of our day, most of the problems of our day today, is that we are letting go of principles that have led to a civil and just society. And we're throwing them aside, the principles of freedom of speech and the principles of presumption of innocence. This has to be changed. Let's carry on with another one here. Another quote. Let's read right from the top. The Chicago principles go on to declare unambiguously that, quote, debate or deliberation may not be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some or even by most members of the university community to be offensive, unwise, immoral, or wrong-headed. In this way, too, the department holds a position incompatible with the principles of the university that houses and governs it. Every university in the West is under attack for freedom of speech. The universities are supposed to be the place where ideas are debated with passion. It is a gladiator sport, a blood sport. It should be considered a coliseum in which the ideas are given their best shot to survive and thrive or die and be gotten rid of for the protection of our society. But they have completely and utterly abandoned their purpose. Let's read this next quote. Perhaps most perniciously, the department proclaims that the invocation of the right to free speech is not legitimate when it is a distraction from the real issue. Okay. Who says what is the real issue? Who? Of course, the Department of English wants to be the group that says that. and then we'll read another quote, I think, one more, maybe two more quotes out of this article. Do read the article if you're interested in this topic. The freedom of speech, freedom of expression has to be protected at universities above all costs. But our universities, they're a disaster today. And this quote, let's read right from the top here. What is clear from its proclamation is the English department's lack of faith in debate and rigorous inquiry, the very qualities that historically defined the University of Chicago. Yes, that is very clear. They're either incredibly stupid, incredibly ideological, or they are incredibly evil in their purposes at this University Department of English. Okay, here is a here is a meme brought to my attention by Brian Lee Martin, who is part of the Honey Badger group. And I think I've seen this one before. I think it's been around a little while, but it stands up quite well today, and it just highlights the hypocrisy of the feminists and the SJW world. This is the same author of both of these articles with their headlines. Let's read the first headline here. For the 1000th time, stop pitching white actors to play Japanese anime characters. And the author's name is Princess something. I can't make it out there. Let's just see if I can expand that up a little bit. Princess Weeks. And this is fairly recent, this one, February 24th, 2020. And if we go back a little less than a year, the exact same person says, "Little Black Mermaid haters, you need to let it go." So anyone can any replacement of a traditionally white character is fine, but any replacement of a non-white character with a white character is blasphemy. Is anybody really surprised that those two thoughts came out of the same SJW mouth? I don't think so. Let's carry on a little bit. This is from the College Fix. The College Fix comes up with a lot of interesting stuff. This one. Williams College suspended a male student for not dating a girl after kissing her. And he's brought a lawsuit about this. Just let that sink in. The college suspended this student, obviously on the complaint of the girl, that after kissing her, he didn't want to date her. Now we're going to have a little look at the quotes here to say what basis. I can assure you it is no legitimate basis for this. Let's read from Sally here. Sally, this is not the real name of the woman making the complaint that got the guy expelled. Sally also physically threatened him, but the college did nothing, he alleges. Williams even refused to let John offer evidence that Sally had a history of making, quote, repeated accusations of cultural insensitivity, casting doubt on her accusations against him. And the basis of her complaint was that he was being culturally insensitive because in her culture, she claims anyways, that a man is supposed to be sensitive to the meaning of kissing indicates that you're going to carry on with a relationship. I don't believe that's the case, but they can use these kinds of boogeyman accusations like cultural insensitivity to mean just about anything they want to. Let's read another quote. But what panicked John was when Sally allegedly said she had lots of people ready to hurt him. She tried to force him, sort of threaten him into dating her or something to that effect. This is in an American university, folks. Let's read this quote. This is about the training materials at the university on handling complaints from women. Of course, there's almost only women that make complaints in the first place at these university campuses with respect to sexual assault and dating and everything else that carries on in their protected lives. These training materials contain anti-male bias and encourage panelists to stereotype men as sexually aggressive and more likely to commit sexual assault, while also suggesting that panelists can ignore the intent of the accused student. Yeah, no surprise there. Let's read this little quote. Sally had, quote, repeatedly lied to her friends and tried to mislead Kirker, the suit claims. Kirker is an investigating person in the case. She misled the investigator and lied to her friends, and this was all known, and in spite of that, they still punished the fellow. Let's read another quote from the article. He has already been forced to resign from a competitive campus leadership position after others in the organization threatened to remove him. One of his witnesses was also stigmatized on campus and forced to leave a student organization. This is for a guy who decided he really didn't want to date the girl. That's his crime. And sad as it is, his own community backed her up. You guys, we have to... You can't accept these guys who are white knighting and simping and all the rest of that. They are part of the problem. They're as bad as feminists, if not worse. Okay, here's another little tidbit from Greg Scammell, pointed out on campus reform, says that less than 2% of Harvard faculty are conservative, a survey finds. Not terribly surprised at that. A recent survey of Harvard University faculty found that 1.46% identify as conservative or very conservative. On the other hand, a combined almost 80% of Harvard's faculty identifies as either liberal or very liberal. And this is why young students are afraid, young students who think conservatively or have a conservative idea in their head are afraid to express it. This is why there's a climate of fear on campuses. There is a purely enforced left-wing SJW ideology on campuses right throughout the West. And it's coming from the faculty. And it all started with women's studies programs entering in the universities in the early 1970s. Just 3 of the 260 faculty respondents who answered the question of who they support for president in 2020 answered Donald Trump. That's the state of our colleges. That's why freedom of speech is under attack on college campuses, because there's only one acceptable way of thinking and talking on university campuses, and that's as an SJW, as a left-wing socialist, preferably spouting hatred of men and white people. Let's carry on. Well, this is just a little announcement I saw come across the other day. ICMI 20, for those of you in Australia, you'll know this probably, July 31st of this year in Sydney. Anyone who's thinking of going to this event, I believe Paul Elam will be speaking, Elizabeth Hobson. I saw a couple of other names and I can't bring them to mind at the moment. It'll probably be the usuals and maybe a surprise visit. I think Deepika Bharwaj, the author of the director of the movie on marriage in India. I think she'll be there. Okay, so that is the few quickie items that I have today. Now, let's jump into a couple of other items here. This topic, general topic that I highlighted here is the obsession with all women this, all female that, all women this, all that seems to be picking up speed in our culture, and it's being promoted in the sense of that, see, women can do everything men can do. So let's look at a few of them here. And in this one, an all-women crew brings Air Canada flight into Edmonton International Airport. So it's an all-women flight crew, and I believe it's an all-women aircraft controller crew and ground crew, everything all women. Of course, it's a stunt that was planned for Women's Day to make their point, I suppose. So let's see what Tony Francis has to say about this. Only a mere 100% representation by women. Quote, but we still have so much further to go is the message of, if you read the article, and thus you see a thinly veiled agenda. It's nothing to do with equality, is it? The message is men are not wanted, men are not needed, the future is female. Well, yes and no, that's the message. But I'll tell you, I'm getting an entirely different message from this. Of course, that men are not wanted, but that's not the same as saying men are not needed. Because behind every single one of these grandstanding all-women's accomplishments is an army of men making sure it can happen without a hitch, is an army of men making sure all of these women are perfectly safe, is an army of men who went before them, taking all of the risks, often dying in the process, to pave that road and put down an escalator and a conveyor belt so that it's very, very, very easy and safe. And after all of that come the all-women crew proving that women can do anything men can do. And I've got a couple of examples of that. And don't kid yourself. There's an army of men behind that all-female flight coming in as well. What this really is all the women are up on the stage, in the lights, and all the men are working the levers behind the scenes and doing the hard job and taking the risks. That's the way it's always been. Why, in other words, why is there not an all-women new invention in the world, even one, of significant import? And I don't mean inventing a clothespin or something like that. I mean, let's be realistic about this. Okay, let's read on. This is an article, a quote from the article. There's definitely been an increase in females, but it's still underrepresented. It stands out a little bit when we have all females in the tower for a day. Yes, it does, because it is men who invented and built and sustained all of what you're doing. If men are not insulted by this, it's because they've been brainwashed into never questioning women. Let's read another quote from the article. First Officer Stacy Kamen was beaming as she soaked in the event. Flying one of the most advanced passenger aircraft in the world is a dream job for her, one that she knows younger women can now aspire to as well. Okay, pretty much a motherhood statement. Let's read another one. With over 200 female pilots now flying with Air Canada in various aircraft, Captain John Nash appreciates the gains made since she began to work on the flight deck 35 years ago. She's encouraged anyone with skills and passion to take to the skies. Yep, that's fine. And don't get me wrong, I agree that women should be given the opportunities to do what their skills will allow them to do and what they're driven to do. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. Women, the bar is always lowered for women, and the support increased. And even better, more qualified, more highly skilled men are passed over so that women can be catapulted into these positions. And I'll tell you this, to be honest, it leaves me with a lack of confidence when I see a female pilot, and it's only happened once in my life that I actually saw a female pilot on a commercial flight flying the plane, and it made me nervous. Not because I don't trust female pilots in general. No, it's not because of that. It is because, and I'll be very clear about it, is that in every case where we look at the requirements for a female to fill a role, generally speaking, all of the bars have been lowered. So when you see that female pilot out there, the question comes to mind, How low did they make the bars so she could be put in the pilot seat? I would rather know that she earned it against fighting and competing against other men as well. But I don't believe that. It's done in the military, they lower the bars. It's done in the fire stations. When people's lives are at risk for firefighters going to build a fire, they're still lowering the requirements of firefighters. They're lowering the requirements to enter the police force so that women can get in. In every case where they celebrate this equality and of achievement of women, it's generally, when you look into it, there's been a lowering of the requirements so that the women could succeed. Now, why am I supposed to have confidence in a female pilot when in every case we look at these things, generally, they're not as skilled? Because the barrier of entry has been lowered so they can get in. And that a more qualified man was passed over so that she could have the job. That's not equality. I would have 100% confidence if I knew that she wasn't given a leg up and she earned her position in the cockpit. But I don't believe that today. And it would take quite a lot. I'd have to see some pretty strong proof that she actually earned that position. And in which case, I would be as comfortable with a woman in the cockpit as with a male pilot. But until that day comes, I'm not going to be comfortable with a female pilot. And that's we should all feel that way, because they are not put to the same test. Let us welcome them with open arms when they are put to the same test and pass. Okay, let's move on here. This is the Air Canada site on how to become a pilot for Air Canada. Here's a little quote from this here. This is just one tip of the iceberg of how they help the women get into the positions. Air Canada has committed to awarding $20,000 per year for 3 years for the scholarship. This is a female-only scholarship. The Captain Judy Cameron Scholarship targets young women in pursuit of non-traditional aviation careers as commercial pilots or aircraft maintenance engineers who may not have the financial means to do so. I can't complain too much of financial aid, but it doesn't stop there. I'd be extremely surprised. Obviously, I can't guarantee it. I don't know the ins and outs, but we've seen examples in many other industries that there's all kinds of ways of helping women over the barriers, over getting incompetent women to pass tests they can't pass, that men can pass. Now here's an example of what, and I apologize for the noise, there's some kind of saw going on, construction outside here. I can't do anything about it. Yeah, is it very loud there, folks? Really destroying the audio or something? I don't know. Anyways, here's a CBC investigation of a, and I highlight this up because there's a few points in here that are disturbing about when these very ambitious women with a chip on their shoulder get into these positions. Veteran pilot, Air Canada is accused, let's read from the top, accused of mishandling female pilots' concern of sexism. Read that a second time. Female pilots' concern of sexism. And we're going to get a couple of quotes out of this article to just see how they twist these things around. Veteran pilot Jane Clegg said airline treated the misogyny she faced as a personality conflict. This is 2 years ago. The misogyny she faced. Okay, there it is. The article author itself is saying, or maybe she's paraphrasing the woman herself, that it is misogyny that she faced. That's how they open it up. Okay, let's have a look at a quote from the article. Let's read right here, right from the top. Clegg points to the day she and a male pilot got into an angry exchange before a flight because she insisted they needed more fuel. She believes his reaction was actually a response to having to share the controls with a woman. He had more seniority. She was taken off the flight crew and assigned to another route that day. Okay, so let's just pick this apart a little bit. He's the captain. She's the co-pilot. He's the boss of that flight. The captain is like a captain on a ship. Their word is law. Now, they got into an angry exchange before the flight because she insisted they needed more fuel. She, the co-pilot, which is a large step down from the captain of the flight, insisted to the captain that they needed more fuel. Now, the captain probably knows his business. And then she goes on to say she believes his reaction was actually a response to having to share the controls with a woman. So there's a gigantic sign that this woman has a frickin' 20-ton chip on her shoulder. And not only that, he had more seniority. He was her senior, he was her captain. She was taken off the flight crew, probably as per quite legitimate policy. You do not want a co-pilot harassing a pilot on a flight. Put her on another route. Sounds 100% reasonable to me. Let's read another quote from this article. Clegg didn't file a formal complaint of gender harassment. She did not file a formal complaint of gender harassment because she says she thought the airline could simply agree not to schedule her and the male pilot together. Well, the reality is in that individual pilots and co-pilots have some control of their own schedules, and they're expected to do that themselves. But in true feminist form, she believes it's somebody else's responsibility to fix up her own schedule. Every other male and presumably female employee there in the flight crew segment has the power to adjust their own schedules, and they do it. But Miss Chip on her shoulder, Clegg, is angry because the airline didn't do it for her. Let's read another quote. I think they see misogyny and harassment more through the lens of personality. Well, you didn't file any complaint, and you sit back on your butt and expected the airline to read your mind and fix everything to your delight without you having to do anything. Reading on, in her view, the airline equated the situation to two guys who just don't get along. Well, yes, they reasonably read the situation exactly as it was presented to them. But she presumes misogyny, and the author of this article leads into the article with the presumption that this was about misogyny. This is a whole different one here. Okay. So that's all I have on that one. And that shows you how these over-entitled, spoiled, chip on their shoulder feminists, I'm presuming she's a feminist because it reeks of feminism, her attitude. So anyways, she didn't retire. She quit the job, and then she had the audacity to say they didn't treat her with the same, to complain that they didn't treat her with the same fanfare that retired employees get treated to. Well, the real reason is that she didn't retire. She quit and walked away. All of her complaints are nonsense. But unfortunately, women like that are destroying the workplace. They're making it harder on companies. They're going to raise costs, and they make everything riskier by demanding to be in positions of control and power, like spoiled children, waving their hands and throwing everything off the shelves in a grocery store to get what they want. And that's just not safe. Okay. Timothy Flannery. Now, I had a reason for this one. I'm going to skip by it right now. We'll come back to Timothy Flannery. The amazing story. This is another all-women thing here. The amazing story of all-women North Pole expedition. Answering an ad in a newspaper, 20 amateur explorers attempted to ski from the Arctic Canada to the top of the world. Okay. Amazing story, all women. The team was divided into 5 groups of 4 adventurers, each of which would tackle one leg of the 416-mile slog from the ice, over the ice from Arctic Canada to the pole. 416 miles. Each team would go something like 80 miles. And this is, again, this is an all-woman team in the modern world with modern support, and they're going to compare themselves to the male teams who went without support on crappy equipment and returned on their own 100 years ago. Mission Unstoppable. Inside, the all-women trek to the North Pole. A dozen women brave polar bears and frostbite to walk ski struggle to the top of the world. It's a bonding exercise, yes, but also a unique chance to study the female body in extremis. Let's take a look what they mean by that. Here are the women here. And this is about the lead woman who had the idea. She also wanted to show girls and women that you didn't need to be a superhero to complete a big objective. While several members of the group were ultra-marathoners or worked as wilderness guides, others had never skied before signing on to the expedition. Fair enough. And this is where they start at, Borneo. It is a makeshift landing strip and an ice floe at 89 degrees north. 89 degrees north. And they're all female, showing that they can do anything a man can do. Because, let's read this, because Borneo drifts, its latitude changes. The team wanted to ski the last latitudinal degree to the pole, so they were picked up by an Mi-8 Russian cargo helicopter and deposited at exactly 89 degrees north. Despite the sleepless nights and blah, blah, blah. So they skied 50 miles or so to the pole. Jet helicoptered in to 50 miles from the pole. These women showed that they could do anything a man can do. And if my memory is right, the jet helicopter went and picked them up at the pole and brought them home. Probably had cappuccinos and massages waiting for them. 50 miles. Not easy, but come on. Here is a guy they compared themselves to in the actual article, Robert Peary. He's an American explorer and United States Navy officer who made several expeditions to the Arctic in the late 19th century, which is the 1800s, and early 20th century. He is best known for claiming to have reached the geographic North Pole on his expedition in 1909. And we're talking April 6th of 1909. And these kinds of expeditions are truly dangerous. They're unsupported. They have no food drops. They aren't parachuted in at 50 miles from the pole. They're literally tough, unknown adventurers, unknown adventures. And they actually name drop Robert Peary's name along with these women who did it, all women. The implication being that, well, you see, women can do it too. And here is Robert Peary. Yes, this is Moko Arliana says never reached the pole. There was, they believed it at the time, and then there was controversy around it, and I don't know if it's ever been settled whether he actually reached the pole or not. Certainly navigational aids and positional systems weren't as accurate back then. But in any case, that is not the point. This is who they're comparing themselves to. And to this fellow here as well, Steger and Shirk, dog sledded to the North Pole. Now this is a 55-day dog sled to the North Pole without helicopter support by two guys who lost one of their dogs along the way as well. Again, they didn't jet helicopters themselves up there. I mean, if it gets any easier, they're just going to jet helicopter themselves within 100 meters to the pole, and they're going to run there in bikinis and run back to the jet helicopter, and they'll say, first women to walk to the North Pole in bikinis. They're tough. This is nothing but a show, publicity stunt. I can't remember why I put this up here. New York Times, all-female group undertakes polar trek. Yes, New York Times put it up there. Let's read it. They are seeking to prove, and those on the first team of the McVitie's Penguin Polar Relay, this is the relay team, this is two different groups of women. They're seeking to prove that anyone can make the trek to the pole, challenging the cold. Try minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. I've seen minus 22 in Ottawa. And the treacherous thin ice as the frozen surface of the Arctic Ocean dissolves in the seasonal melt. Right, anyone can make it, right? Well, if you have jet helicopter support, yeah, and a relay team of 5 groups of 4, probably you're right. And this is a picture of the all-female expedition team. Reading another from that article. The sea ice appeared to be anything but fragile as the helicopter landed in the middle of a wide, smooth flow to deposit me and my team at a location some 80 kilometers from the North Pole. It's kind of sounding like an adventure vacation rather than accomplishment to me. So anyways, here's another example in the Atlantic. A hitch at NASA headquarters. NASA has carried out its first all-female spacewalk. We've learned about this just recently. And yes, minus 22 Fahrenheit is not terribly cold, but that is the summertime in the Arctic. And I think it does get colder at times, and I think that's just the coldest that those ladies experienced on their adventure vacation. So, it sounds like a fun adventure. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is, a fun adventure. But they are calling on the spirits of these guys who did it without support 100 years ago. And they're portraying this again as one of these all women can do anything things. And the NASA spacewalk is the same. The NASA all-female spacewalk is nothing but a publicity stunt. It is done at the end of 60 years of space research and risks taken by men. And they did not put a female team out there until they knew every last bit of it was safe and secured. And you can bet an army of men were at the ready for handling any emergency that may come up. Here are the women. Good for them for getting that opportunity. The first all-female NHL play-by-play lineup. Again, these things make news because all of a sudden we've been having play-by-play male announcers since the beginning of televised hockey. They have a female. Why is it that women don't invent something of their own? They always just feel like, oh, you got to get in on what the guys are doing. Here's another example. Chico P's first all-female fire engine crew hopes to inspire younger generation of women. What is the advantage, other than a publicity stunt, of an all-female fire engine crew? Especially when a lot of these women are getting into their positions by having the requirements lowered for them. Some of them can't carry the hose, and apparently they're still allowed to become firemen. So what are they? Let's take a look at another one. Britain's first all-female train operates rush hour service. Marking International Women's Day, a rush hour southeastern service left London staffed by a female driver and conductor, while female network rail signallers staffed the route. A publicity stunt. Another publicity stunt. First all-female crew of a C5. All these things make news headlines. Then they all share one thing in common. They're publicity stunts. And who's fooled by this? Women this week. Finland's all-female coalition government. Let's continue on. CAT, I think that's Caterpillar, heavy equipment manufacturer, on their website, all-female paving crew crushes stereotypes. No, it doesn't crush stereotypes. This is just a publicity stunt. How much will you ever see a female crew out on a 100-degree Fahrenheit day on a hot highway with cars going by behind hot asphalt laying down roads? No, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that because women will refuse to do it. But we're going to see all kinds of these publicity stunts. CareFlight welcomes its first all-female doctor team. Now, am I supposed to feel like safe because their criteria for choosing their doctor team is that they're women? For crying out loud, at some point in an emergency, I'd like to know that they put the best qualified person on the job. This is insanity that's going on, folks. And it's all because of feminism. Feminism poisons and destroys everything it touches, without exception. So, we're coming on, we're on an hour here. And I've got just one more set of topics to go over, and it's not really a full set of topics, but it's about climate change. One of our favorite bugaboo ideas meant to support and encourage global government and extract more taxes from you, so that the wealthy people can have control of absolutely everything in the world. Thank you, George Soros. And this is Tim Flannery 2013. And we're going to find out who is Tim Flannery. So just imagine yourself in a world 5 years from now when there is no ice over the Arctic. That's 2013. How many times have we been told this? How many times? Here's Timothy Flannery. He's an Australian mammologist, paleontologist, environmentalist, conservationist, explorer, and public scientist. That's the first time I've ever heard that term. What in the world is a public scientist? But he served as Chief Commissioner of the Climate Commission, a federal government body providing information on climate change to the Australian public. And in 2013, Flannery announced that he would join other sacked commissioners to form the Independent Climate Council that would be funded by the community. So this guy has zero training. Zero training in meteorology, which would probably the closest thing coming to a climate scientist, meteorology, or maybe there are climate scientists. His first specialty is mammologist. So he works with mammals. So he's sympathetic to mammals. That's fine. I get it. Mammals are cute, some of them. I can be sympathetic to them. I don't want them to die out, get extinct, or anything like that. But here, he worked as the chief commissioner Chief Commissioner of the Climate Commission in Australia, providing information on climate change to the Australian public. Well, let's read a little bit more about Flannery here. He was named Australian Humanist of the Year in 2005 and Australian of the Year in 2007. Until mid-2013, he was a professor at Macquarie University and held the Panasonic Chair in Environmental Sustainability. A guy whose training has nothing to do with climate, meteorology, geology, none of those things. He's a mammologist. As a mammologist, I imagine part of what he studies is how milk comes out of the mammaries of mice. He was also chairman of the Copenhagen Climate Council, an international group of business and other leaders that coordinated a business response to climate change and assisted the Danish government in the lead up to COP15. In 2015, Jack P. Blaney Award for Dialogue recognized Flannery for using dialogue and authentic engagement to build global consensus for action around climate change. The media will call this guy a climate scientist with not a single credential in climate science. So that's what we're up against. And that's what we went over yesterday with that with a Financial Post article about believing climate science doesn't mean you believe in you support every claimed cure, claimed economic response to claimed climate change. The people they prop up as having credentials to speak authoritatively on climate are nothing but shills. So folks, with that is everything I have for today. And Adam John says, but he has the right beliefs regarding climate. Yes, he does, doesn't he? That's all the credential he needs. And what is this comment here? Public scientist equals person with a science degree who does no search and spends all his time pontificating to the lay public. Possibly that's it. That's probably as good a definition as any. So, folks, thanks again for joining me to go over some of these items that have come across my desk. And I think at this point, Monday will be the next coffee break. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Don't forget to have a good coffee. And where's Michael reminding everybody to keep Stephen caffeinated here? I didn't notice your comment come up today, Michael Keller, if you're with us. In any case, everyone have a great weekend, and join me again on Monday for another coffee break where we talk about items in the news and in our culture. Ciao for now.